Rita, start. Dr. Rita, you can start.
Can we start it? Participants तो भी कम है थोड़े.
आ जाए. We'll start.
Okay. So my screen is visible, Dr. Sharad?
Yes, visible. Just start, please.
Good evening, everyone. And today we will be discussing about ecological foundation of evergreen revolution. So before coming to the evergreen revolution, we will look into how the green revolution came into existence. How, because we all know about the green revolution and how there was transition from green to evergreen revolution. See, before independence, there was all of us know that there was Bengal famine in 1943, which was very devastating, and almost 2 million people they died because of this famine, जिसको हम सूखा कहते हैं, सूखा पड़ गया था उसकी वजह से. It was a huge epidemic. So there was a need for more food production. So after independence, increasing food production was one of the major challenge before the prime minister, then prime minister. So he a lot of land was brought under the agriculture, and land was basically from deforestation. They for a huge conversion of forest land into agriculture took place, because we need to increase the food production for our growing population. And there was a very huge deficit of agriculture production. So in order to streamline that, the first thing was to to bring more land under the cultivation. However, after some time, it has been noticed that all over the world, we need to have certain more technology breeding oriented things, so that we can develop within less area, we can have more food production. So we all know about Dr. Norman Borlaug. He was a scientist, he was a Nobel laureate, and he identified a dwarfing genes in Japanese wheat cultivar. That was a Norin 10, and he transferred these genes into wheat. So now after hybridization, after breeding, the new wheat variant was having dwarf plant, and therefore it will have a short life and more grains. Our father of green revolution, Professor M.S. Swaminathan, he obtained these seeds of the Mexican dwarf wheat and brought to the India. Professor Swaminathan is called, he was known as a father of green revolution for India. And in 1967 to 68, this dwarf wheat, this enabled the Indian government to harvest more than 70 million tons, as against 12 million tons production in 1964. So there was a huge surplus amount of production. So this was called Green Revolution. By using a dwarf variety of wheat, we have got so much production. Accordingly, there was a 17 to 22% of increase of rice, maize, and pearl millet production also. However, we focused more on rice and wheat only. Dr. William S. Gord, he was US Agency International Development. He coined the term Green Revolution in 1968. So this word of Green Revolution was basically green from the photosynthesis. That is photosynthesis using the green pigment, and it is used for production of, for the photosynthesis, using the sunlight and water, they form the carbohydrate, and they use chlorophyll as a pigment. So with the Green Revolution India, the India's image changed from a begging bowl of 1940s when there was a Bengal famine to a bread basket, because there was a huge surplus amount of food production. However, very soon, Professor Swaminathan, he realized that there was a certain mistakes in this green revolution. So he presented his observation in the Indian Science Congress in 1968. However, the focus of the government was more towards short gain, towards more production, rather than actually looking into the environment point of view or the ecological point of view. He has shown that these dwarf variety of wheat and rice cultivar, they were using more of a fertilizer and more chemical pesticide and more irrigation. So these are called external input for more production. As a result, the farmer of Northwest India, basically Punjab, Haryana, they were using more of this green revolution. So they were using more of water, fertilizer, and pesticides in their field for more production. However, it has a certain bad impact on our soil and water health. We will examine it in a few minutes. So the indiscriminate use of pesticide, fungicide, herbicide, they all cause adverse changes in biological balance and lead to more incidences of cancer and other diseases. Because these were, besides the soil, these were also going into the grains of the crop and other edible part. So it was equally harmful to human being also. Also, these use of these pesticides and herbicides, they indiscriminate use, they brought down the soil fertility, which is the natural soil fertility, and a huge irrigation without any proper planning. It caused loss of lot of groundwater, and when they were using more surface water, a lot of pollution was going on because of this fertilizer and pesticides. They were more use and excessive water for irrigation, then it will causing harm to our surface water body, as well as it is causing harm, as you know that this is also one of the non-point source of pollution. So it was damaging our water bodies, damaging our soil ecosystem, and also indiscriminate withdrawal of groundwater from these bore wells. It also caused rapid depletion of our groundwater, underground water. So whatever groundwater reserve is there, it was soon depleting very fast. Government, they give subsidy to the electricity. So with more of subsidy, the farmer used to withdraw more of water for the agriculture, and this was causing a harm to the entire ecological balance. So very soon, by 1980s, the ill health, the ecologically devastation of these practices came into the notice. Also, this green revolution was basically on three pillars. That is, they are using high yielding seeds, they were using good soil fertility, and water management. These are the three parameters on which green revolution was sustaining. So we came down, instead of a lot of crops, we came down to only rice and wheat cultivation, because this was gaining more profit. So we were not using any nitrogen rich plants like leguminous plants. as you know, leguminous plants, the pulses, they are having root nodules in their root. They tend to have nitrogen fixing bacteria. So there was a loss of nitrogen within the soil. So the farmers, they started using more of mineral nitrogen and more of chemical fertilizer, which were rich in nitrogen. So again, this was causing a effect toward the biodiversity of soil microbiota. And using this, and we were using this high yielding variety, and we are not using the local variety. So we are also somewhat, because when we are using a local variety for production purpose, they're having some useful genes in them, which can adapt them for that particular climate conditions. So when we are not using the local variety, so soon these genes were also going out of the context. The next important thing is that green revolution, they bring about food security at national level, but not at the individual level. We need to understand that we were growing more rice and wheat. So we are having surplus amount of food production at national level. We can say that our production have increased, but actually at ground level, at individual level, at farmer level, it has not gained to the farmers, specifically for those farmers which are resource poor and which are poor, and they don't have enough facilities to carry out such kind of agriculture. Because this green revolution, this cultivation was also highly mechanized also. So they need more of mechanization also for tilling and other purposes. They require more fertilizer, more water. So the small and this marginal farmers and those poor farmers, they were not getting benefit of this green revolution agriculture. Also, we were focusing more on rice and wheat and not on the other cereals. So it bring in a nutritional deficiency also. As you know, rice and wheat are only rich source of carbohydrate, but there was lack of proteins. So this caused a lot of malnutrition in the population. So these are some of the drawbacks of the green revolution. Swaminathan in 1968, he, as you know, that he brought this notice into to the Indian government through the paper, through presentation in Indian Science Congress. Besides this, simultaneously in 1974, in 4 years later, there was a UN Convention on Human Environment that you all know, that is called Stockholm Convention. There was again this point that human activity are exhausting the natural resources of the planet. And it was recognized that ecological degradation and poverty are mutually reinforced, that they are causing accelerated damage to our natural resources. So, and after that in 1987, again, the World Commission on Environment and Development, they bring about that our common future. You all know about this because we have been discussing this in our sustainability science in various lectures also. So these were the equally concern over the global platform. Then again in 1992, there was UN conference on environment and development in Rio Summit, Rio de Janeiro, that resulted in adoption of Agenda 21. that need a reconciliation of environment and development together. So we need to think about agriculture in terms of sustainable development. So the term came evergreen revolution. Professor Swaminathan in 1996, he designed a goal to achieve productivity in perpetuity without causing ecological harm. So basically, what is evergreen revolution? Evergreen revolution is the sustainable advances in crop productivity per unit of land, water, time, and without associated ecological harm. That means we are generating more productivity per unit of a land, water, and time, and we are not causing harm to our ecological balance. So basically, it's a sustainable management of natural resources, and it involves enhancement of our soil quality, biodiversity, and overall increasing the agriculture productivity. So our concern is shifted from productivity to a sustainable productivity. So initially, our concern was when we were in green revolution, our concern was commodity centric. It means we were concerned more about how much production we are getting. What is our food production? But now we are taking overall the system approach. That means we are looking into the ecosystem approach towards the development. So evergreen revolution is basically we are using eco-friendly ecological practices. And again, when we are saying food security, we are ensuring food security at national level also, as well as at individual level also. How we can improve the food security at individual level? For that, we have to strengthen the livelihood security of people, of the farmers, of those who are dependent on this revolution. See, initially this green revolution was commodity centric. Now we are looking into evergreen revolution. Here we are looking production gains of today, not eroding the prospects for the tomorrow, for the future. So here we are concentrating more on the integrated natural resource management. We will be also conserving various farming techniques. We are using sustainable approach for agriculture, for increasing the agriculture productivity. We will be using green agriculture. We will be understanding about green agriculture in a short while. So we were there, how we can increase the livelihood security. Just a minute. So we have to look into the sustainable food security. This involves livelihood security of all the members within a household by ensuring physical and economic access for the balanced diet, including the needed micronutrients, safe drinking water, environmental sanitation, basic healthcare, and primary education. So we are not just ensuring the food availability, we are looking the overall health of the farmers, of the community. And we have to take care, when we are taking care of our farmers, only then we can get a good result. That is, we have to ensure the livelihood security of our rural people. And it can be achieved through on-farm as well as non-farm micro enterprises. We also need to have a proper market linkages. So we are not just looking into the food production, we are making a complete arrangement that how food production is improving the livelihood condition of our rural community. So how we can improve this on-farm and non-farm livelihood? We can improve this using technology and knowledge empowerment. So we have to improve the livelihood of our rural community by imparting knowledge to them through various technological interventions. Looking into this, Professor Swaminathan, they have given the concept of Village Resource Center and Village Knowledge Center. Village Knowledge Center is basically developed at the level of a village. They with the use of this many this local specific and demand driven things, they will provide knowledge to the rural community. We will learn about this in a few minutes. So here we are using technology word. What does this technology means? Technology here means eco-technology, means biotechnology, ICT, our information communication and space technology, our nuclear and nanotechnology. So we are not just confining our science to our cultivation to rural community. We are also giving a blending of scientific knowledge, plus we are blending it with our traditional knowledge, and we are learning it day by day with the equal collaboration between the scientific as well as rural community. And these eco-technologies are pro-nature, pro-poor, and it removes the gender biasness by involving women. So it's a pro-woman orientation also. So basically within this village resource center, self-help groups are formed and knowledge workers are trained, and they impart training to the local farmers for various farming activity as well as non-farming activity. Non-farming activity includes like in fishing, livelihood, livestock, poultry. These all will cover under the non-farm technologies. They are given also training about the market linkages and eco-micro entrepreneurship for their product. They develop a proper market linkage so that whatever food, whatever produce they have produced, they should get a proper pricing also. Besides this, these knowledge centers, village knowledge center and village resource center, they also facilitate in development of a microcredit support also by linking with the banking system. If they want any loan or credit from bank, these facility are also provided by this. So this entire village with eco micro enterprises promoting non-farm and farm livelihood options for income generation and food security is called a bio village. So this entire structure will be called as a bio village, in which we will look into the various livelihood option and also maintain their various avenue for income generation and food security. So basically, BioVillage is a site of action for various eco-technology. So we have transformed our village to a biological, biological or bio-village. So there are 3 dimensions of evergreen revolution that we are going to use eco-friendly methods. We are looking into the eco-enterprises. And the third thing is that we will also look into the economic part, that is equity and market linkages. All these require a local specific and demand-driven knowledge, which will be provided by the Village Resource Center. In 2004, then Prime Minister, they have developed this Village Resource Center with the help of ISRO. And this MS Swaminathan Research Foundation was one of the Village Resource Center. And with the help of ISRO, they have developed such kind of network at various block level. To initiate with this, they started in the Puducherry, in Pondicherry, which is now called as a Puducherry. Now it has been, there are more than 461 village resource centers, which are being, where informations about various health services, whereas all the climate related information, these are all shared by the Space Application Center, which is one of the part of ISRO. So they provide all information services which are required for the proper agriculture or farming or this non-farming activities. So with the help of satellite and this ICT enabled this thing, this village knowledge center, they impart knowledge to the villages. And there are 22 states and union territory where they have been developed till date by March 2021. So let us now understand what are the component of Evergreen Revolution. Evergreen Revolution is basically having 4 components: eco agriculture, second is bio villages, third one is bio knowledge center, which we have just explained, and fourth one is ethics and equities in economic, social, and gender divided. Already we have explained these 4 components. Basically, Evergreen Revolution is a technology and knowledge intensive. So it is very good for a resource poor and marginal small farm communities also, because they can get information about this local specific and demand driven knowledge from their village resource center or bio village. So so we can now understand that this Evergreen Revolution is not only affecting the national food security, but also are helping our poor rural community. And with the technology transfer, all the information are shared with at the local level. So here we call as a traditional biotechnology, and we are not using the recombinant DNA technology. So we are not saying that we are sharing the knowledge of genetic GM crops. We are just looking into the various traditional biotechnology methods. And we are using satellite and computer-based ICT technology. And in Evergreen Revolution, we are using more of a biologically oriented things like biofertilizers, biopesticides, verming composting, instead of chemical-laden fertilizer or pesticides. So we have very less amount of external input. So this is called low external input sustainable agriculture. And we are achieving a sustainable management of natural resources by creation of this non-farm and farm livelihood. Let us now come to what are the ecological foundations of our evergreen revolution. So by now we now understood that what is evergreen revolution. It is basically we are looking into sustainability point of view, and we are making it one minute. Basically, it's a sustainable management of our natural resources. This is a prime criteria. So we will understand about in a few minutes how we are going to improve how we are sustainably use our natural resources. So concept of this was again came into 2003 when the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in South Africa, they recognized the essential requirement of our natural resources. That is water, energy, health, agriculture, and biodiversity for sustainable production, which is a basic need for every human being. So we have to look into that. We need to have these 5 items to control, to which these contribute to our sustainable food security. So main aim of this evergreen revolution is to have more of sustainable management of natural resources, and not only at the national level, but also to ensure food security at individual household level. So before that, let us understand what is ecological footprint. Ecological footprint is basically a resource management tool that measures how much area of land and water a human population requires to produce the resource it consumes, and to absorb the waste it generates under the prevailing technology. That is, how much land and water resources are being used to produce the resource which human beings can use. Secondly, second part is that to absorb the waste generated also, because whenever we are consuming these resources, we are also generating waste. So basically, it's a resource management. So we need to have a resource management tool, because whatever human beings are doing, it is affecting the planet. Whatever things, whether we are doing agriculture, whether we are doing setting up an industry or anything we are doing, it is going to affect the earth ecosystem, our planet ecosystem, and we are also the part of our ecosystem. So ultimately, it's going to affect us also. So basically, the evergreen revolution has a principle of ecology, economics, social, and gender equity. The same which has the principle of our sustainability. So in other words, we can say it's a sustainable management of natural resources which are required for agriculture. So what are the resources we are going for agriculture production? We are using soil, we are using our water, we are using the nutrients in the water, nutrients in the soil, sorry, and the water, and we are consuming the energy. And of course, we are using the biodiversity. So these are different resources which we are using for our agriculture production. So how we can maintain, how we can ecologically balance this agriculture by sustainable management of a soil, by using best practices of a crop pest management, by how we can uh, effectively manage the nutrient use and prevent the loss, how we can conserve the water and make efficient use of available water resources, how we can efficiently use the energy, and how we can conserve the energy. These are the basic ecological foundations of our evergreen revolution. Let us understand each one of this in a few minutes. So first one is our soil. Soil is basically important component for our agriculture because seeds are grown over it, and plants, they take up nutrient from the soil and they absorb water through the soil. So the soil is very important component. And what are the challenges before the soil? One of the major challenges, rapid soil erosion. We all know what is soil erosion. Soil erosion is loss of the top soil layer due to water or air or wind. And scientific study have shown that it takes 100 to 400 years for development of 1 centimeter of soil. So it's basically a non-renewable source of natural resource because it is depleting fast and it takes much time to get renewed. The second important thing is soil health and fertility. Plants, they are using the crop, which they are using soil, they are using all the nutrient, they are absorbing nutrient through the roots from the soil itself. So we have to take various measures to prevent the soil erosions. We need to stop deforestation. We need to have more of soil conservation managements. We have to ensure more of techniques that prevent the loss of nutrient, that decline the productivity potential of a soil. We should immediately stop the techniques such as shifting cultivation. These are the cultivation practices which is causing a huge soil erosion. So we need to understand what are the reasons for the soil erosion, and accordingly we have to develop strategies for that, how we can minimize the soil loss and nutrient within the loss. There are certain measures to prevent the soil erosion, sorry. Like whenever we are developing a road or railway line, we have seen that there are some certain soil which are kept there. So we have to keep the natural drains open, not the closed, so that it will keep the soil intact. The next one is that we need to avoid deforestation. We need to avoid practices like shifting cultivation, overgrazing, because overgrazing will again disturb the vegetation cover of the land, and so it will affect the soil. Plus, we have to look into what are the improper cropping techniques we are using for our agriculture practices. we have to reduce the runoff, we have to increase the groundwater recharge. So these are many agriculture practices which will prevent the soil erosion and increase the conservation of soil and water. Soil health and fertility are very important for our because they are giving nutrient supply to our crops. So what are the eco-friendly methods? Eco-friendly methods are we need to boost the biological part of our soil. That is the earthworms and the beneficial microorganisms, like we have to improve the nitrogen fixing bacteria. We have to improve the soil conditions using such kind of crops or nitrogen fixing bacteria, which will ensure the availability of nutrients within the soil. We need to decrease our dependence on chemical fertilizer. We have to look into usage of more organic manures like farmyard manures, compost, green manures, oil cakes, and various waste product of animal origins like dried bones, dried blood and bones. They are very important manures. Fish manure, urine. You can now see a lot of uh, these green manures like waste product of the animal origin. They can be used for improving the soil texture and fertility of our soil. Then we can have some cereal legume rotation methods. Like after cereal, we can have a leguminous plant, or we can have a mixed cropping also. Like along with the cereal, we can have nitrogen fixing like plants, which are leguminous plants, pulses. We can introduce stem modulating legumes like Sesbania rostrata. These are recommended to be grown because they can enrich soil nitrogen within the range of 100 to 120 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare. So you can imagine, I mean, if we use this leguminous plant, so how much of nitrogen it can enrich the soil with nitrogen. We can use another source of bacteria like blue-green bacteria and free-living bacteria such as Azolla. And these are many symbiotic and asymbiotic bacteria nitrogen fixation. Symbiotic nitrogen fixation is like we have this rhizobium bacteria within the root nodule of our leguminous plant. They use root nodule of leguminous plant as a host, and they can fix the nitrogen from the soil, and it will be converted into a bioavailable form. And many of these nitrogen fixing bacteria like Azolla, they can freely fix the atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into bioavailable form of nitrogen, because you all know that nitrate is a bioavailable form of nitrogen. So these bacteria, blue-green algae, they can be used as a biofertilizer, and the nitrogen deficiency can be improved, addressed through these. Then there's vermicomposting, organic manure. This you all know how we can use our kitchen waste and the waste product from the this animal products, cow dungs, and we can use it for our agriculture purpose. Farmers should also know about the soil health card. Farmers are being trained. These activities are being done at the village knowledge center. They are given training how they can use the soil health card, where they will get information what are the farming techniques they are using, and how this farming technique will be affecting the physical, chemical, and microbiological components of the soil fertility, and they can easily monitor. So a lot of this, we have Krishi Vigyan Kendra. They all provide training. They have this helpline also. So today's farmer is, if they can use tap the maximum of the ICT facility, they can get enough information with the help of government and non-government support also, and through our this bio village and village resource center and village knowledge center as well at the level of village. So we come to the next part, that is our integrated pest management. So this is again with the aim to reduce the harmful pesticides. So the basic criteria is that we have to use the pesticide management system, integrated pesticide management, so that it can be, it should not have a side effect of synthetic chemicals, because when we are using pesticides, it's going to affect the health of our soil as well as to our crop. Like we have just understood before that this pesticide can affect the grain also, and many of these pesticides, they are cancer causing also. So a relatively new concept of integrated pest management have been introduced, and this management practices understands the life cycle of pest and population dynamic of pest species, and utilize all the various techniques and methods to control the pest population so that it doesn't affect our cultivation. So basically, we are looking into the population dynamics of the pest, and we are using the concept of population ecology, ecosystem science, and economics pest management. This is one of the this figure shows the combination of a various technique. Basically, it's a science-based technique. We have to look into what is the life cycle of a pesticides, how pests are interacting with environment, and we need to understand how we can control the population of pest. So for this, a lot of studies are being conducted, and it's basically a time-taking process, because we need to understand the complete life cycle of a pest, and we need to understand what is the surrounding surrounding biotic and abiotic factors which are affecting the population of a pest, and based on that, what could be the best source of method to control the pest. So basically, we are managing the population of pest using various technology. We need to understand what could be the proper methods, how we can resist the pest. Basically, we need to develop technology, how we can reduce the population of pest and reduce the risk of using the pesticide to people as well as environment. So for this, we need to have population study. We need to understand the behavior study of the pest in lab condition also, and in field condition also. We need to understand what are the measures by which we can reduce the reduce the population of a pest, and what could be the most eco-friendly way of using pesticide. Like one of the example I can show you, pheromones. Pheromones, you all know, it's a sort of chemicals which are emitted by animals that give signal to another animals of the same species. So basically, one of the example is that female gypsy moth, they emit a pheromones to attract the males. So basically, it's a hormone. Pheromone is a chemical which is released to attract the opposite gender of the same species. So if we can understand what is the chemical nature of these pheromones, we can develop these pheromones in laboratory condition, and we can fill it in a bag, and we can put in a crop, I mean in a agriculture field. So all the females will be all the male will be moth will be attracted towards that bag, and once they are attracted to that bag, we can easily remove that bag, and when there is no male population within that agriculture ecosystem, then ultimately the population of this moth will come down. So this is one of the successful example of integrated pest management, which is being practiced in many parts of the world. So we are using a natural pheromone. We are synthesizing pheromones, and we are depositing this in a filling a bag with this pheromones and putting into the field. And the male will attract, and then we will safely remove this bag with the male, and the population of male will be removed from the ecosystem. So when both male and female will not be there, they will not going to have a family, and ultimately their population will be reduced. So this is a eco-friendly way of reducing the pest. So next is the integrated nutrient management. Integrated nutrient management is biological aspect of soil fertility management. In this, we tighten the nutrient cycling with the synchronizing the demand of crop and the nutrient release within the soil, thereby minimizing the loss of nutrient through leaching, runoff, volatilization, and immobilization. Leaching is what? Leaching is when there is a loss of nutrient from the soil to the water, through the groundwater. Runoff is what? Runoff is loss of nutrient. When there is a rainfall, the nutrient can get dissolved with the water, and ultimately it is again go back to the water body. So there's a loss of nutrient along with the runoff. Volatilization is loss of nutrient when we are spread the nutrients within the soil, and it get volatilized due to the high temperature. And immobilization is that process in which the nutrient will be converted into a form which will be not be able with which the plants will not be able to be absorbed by the nutrient will not be absorbed by the plant. I mean, it will be converted in that form of nutrient which a plant cannot be absorb it. Like I have just informed that plant use nitrogen in the ammonium form. So if this ammonium form is converted into nitrate form, in nitrate form, if this nitrate is converted in ammonium form, so it will be immobilized. Though nitrogen will be present in the soil, it will not be able, the plants will not be able to take up the nutrient. So this is called immobilization. I hope you understand this all for the process of nutrient loss. Immobilization is that in which nutrient is present, but it is in that form that is not accepted, that is by which plant does not absorb it. So we need to have a strategy so that we can incorporate both organic and inorganic plant nutrient that will ensure the nutrient availability. So we have to give a combination of organic as well as inorganic plant nutrient so that proper nutrient availability is there and which can be absorbed by the plant. So it will be, so this available, if nutrient availability will be there, so it will increase the crop productivity and prevent soil degradation. So let us understand what are the few of this thing. Basically, both of this new integrated nutrient management and integrated pest management, these are having a close interaction with the scientist as well as with the traditional farmer. So it's a bottom-up approach also and participatory approach also. Basically, we are using information from lab to land and land to land. These are all techniques which farmers knows, and with the help of proper scientific input, we can achieve good soil management, because this integrated management and integrated nutrient management and integrated pest management, they require more of a scientific input. So with the scientific study, we can, whatever result we are getting, we have to inform our farmers so that they can use in their land. So it's basically land from lab to a land practice. Also, the farmer which is in the field, they have more of experience. So they can also share their experience to the scientific community so that they can accordingly have more study, because scientists, they are doing a pilot basis study. Ultimately, when it goes to the field trials and when it goes to the field level, only then farmers can inform how they are going, how a particular management technique is going to improve the productivity. So it's a participatory approach from a scientific community as well as from farming community. Next, we come to the next natural resource, that is water. Water is another very important natural resources, and we need to conserve water because we all know we are going to have a lot of water crisis in near future, and all of we are going to face it. Though our earth is covered with the water, but that water is in unusable form. Whatever water is there in the ocean. A lot of studies are being done for the desalinization of salt water for our ocean water, but it's a very, it's not a very economical, not economically viable solution. A lot of Gulf countries, they are having water shortage. So they are practicing this desalinization plant. In India also, we have in Rajasthan, Gujarat, we have, and in many of the coastal states. In the southern part also, we have started using the desalinization plant also, or taking the ocean water and desalinize it and use for the agriculture purpose. So the other source of water is our rainwater. Rainwater is a fresh water which is very important source of energy, water, and we need to have methods to conserve this water and sustainably use this rainwater. We need to improve We need to harvest, we need to have more of rainwater harvesting system. We need to have a good conjunctive use of river, rain, ground, sea, and sewage water in appropriate combination. Why we are saying this? Because we cannot totally depend on rain-fed agriculture. So we need to have groundwater also. Plus, we can have a judicial use of the treated water which we are getting from our sewage treatment plant also. As you all know that we have a lot of sewage treatment plant also, which in which the waste sewage water is being treated and uh, treated, and they can be used for agriculture purpose also. So we need to have a proper balance of a river water. River water we are using how? We are using as a canal water. And groundwater we are using as a tube well water. Rainwater we are using. Rainwater again, if we conserve it, it is going to recharge our groundwater. So all these forms of water should be used in a proper combination so that we can conserve all these sources of water. We should not exploit our aquifers which are carrying the groundwater, because this is the ultimate source of pure water in case of exigencies. So unnecessarily more withdrawal of groundwater should be prohibited as far as possible. And we need to have more of a cooperative management of watershed in command area. We need to have more of proactive measures to avoid water conflict between the states. Then another one of the important method is micro irrigation. Micro irrigation is basically what? It's what we know, drip irrigation and sprinklers. This is micro irrigation method in which we efficiently use the water in the root zone of crop rather than giving water to the entire cropping area. So with the installation of drip irrigation method or sprinklers, we can efficiently and optimally use the water which are required by the root zone of the agriculture crop. Studies have shown that it is one of the most eco-friendly irrigation method, and it has a saving of more than 60% of water, and also can increase the yield of extent up to the 40 to 50% over the surface irrigation. So it's increasing the yield also, and it is conserving the water also. So such kind of practices should be more promoted. And in India, we have been using, like in Meghalaya in Northeast, they are already using these bamboo pipes. And in Maharashtra, they are using clay pipes. And in Rajasthan, they are using pitchers. They are already in the traditional farming system. They have been using these kind of practices to conserve the water. So we need to improve usage of more of these eco-friendly technologies. Further, from biological point of view or biotechnology point of view, we need to have some plants which can withstand this drought conditions. One of the example is that this Prosopis julifera. This is you can see this tree a lot of in Delhi. This is one of the exotic plant which has been exotic and introduced plant. It is not native to the India, but now it is so much of that it has been now covered a lot of flora of Delhi. So biotechnology can offer this thing that we can extract the drought resistant gene from these plants And we can use this into the rice system using the recombinant DNA technology. Studies are going on this, and once it is approved, so it can be introduced in field also. As you know, rice is a crop which is taking more water. So if we introduce this gene to the rice, so it will be beneficial for all of us to save the water for irrigation for rice. Next form of natural resource is energy. As you know, a lot of technology, a lot of practices in farm, they use energy. These are energy intensive, like when we are using tractors, plowing, planting seeds, harvesting, threshing. These are all energy intensive activities. And we have been using many fossil fuels for these for operation of these farming operation for techniques. So ultimately, these greenhouse gases is being released to our atmosphere. When we are using this, our groundwater through tube well, we are pumping groundwater for irrigation. We are using both electricity also and diesel also. So this is, we are using more of our non-renewable resources. As you know, diesel is one of the non-renewable sources. So we need to shift our energy demand to more of a renewable source of energy, like we can harness energy from biogas, from biomass energy, solar energy, wind energy. And we can also have a co-generation of energy also, like a combination of different methods, like we can combine solar and wind energy with the biogas for farm operations like pumping water and drying grains. So these are some of the methods with which we can enhance the usage of renewable sources of energy. We can also include mixed dynamic cropping, like we can have a crop and farm animals. Like if we use animals for farming, their dung can be used as a biogas for cooking and lighting. These are all traditional processes and very eco-friendly, which already small farming families, they have been doing. So they are using this eco-friendly techniques from past period. There are also one of the major thing is that no tillage cultivation. Although this is a scientifically challenged point, but still many people say that if we do not tillage, we do not tillage the soil, then we can save energy for large mechanized farm. How it is under investigation, because it has been different farm is have some crop is showing that tillage is very necessary for crop production, and for some crops it is showing that no tillage can have a good soil conservation method also. So still a lot of studies are going on for this, for tillage purpose. Then next we come to the biodiversity, our natural resources, our agrobiodiversity. Agrobiodiversity refers to the variety of crop and livestock organisms that contribute to our food and agriculture production. When we say biodiversity, it is from all levels. We know biodiversity is at the level of genes, biodiversity is the level of species, and also the biodiversity is at the level of ecosystem. So when we say term biodiversity, it is sum total of all the variability, all biodiversity at the level of genes, individual, and as well as at agriculture ecosystem. So we have to have a proper balance between all the biotic components of our ecosystem which are interacting with our crops, especially the pollinators, pests, parasites, predators. They all are interacting with our crops, trees, fish, and livestock. So we need to have a proper balance between them so that our ecosystem functions properly. Agrobiodiversity in particularly, they have been conserved by many forest-dwelling tribal communities. So within the framework of Evergreen Revolution, steps are taken to revitalize the genetic conservation of tradition of tribal and rural families through recognition of contribution and creation of economic stake in conservation. You know, many of the tribal population, they are totally dependent on forest. And they have been, it is not for the today, in the past also, they are, their life is synchronized with the forest. So they are taking measures for conservation of their biological resources within the forest. So there are two main acts which are dealing with this: the Protection of Plant Variety and the Farmers' Right Act of 2001 and the Biological Diversity Act. These two acts are controlling the resources, natural resources towards the agriculture development. MSSRF, they have the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. They have developed a strategy of a cultivation, consumption, and commercialization for ensuring conservation of threatened and many indigenous variety of rice, pulses, and millets. So it was very important that we need to conserve our indigenous varieties because these all have many genetic diversity which can be used in the future. So it is very important that we conserve our indigenous variety of rice, pulses, and millets. These are different kind of non-cereal crops. We will understand about it in a minute. Okay. These all local variety, they have useful gene, which have a low yielding traditional variety, which are going for yield. For example, they have local variety, they have genes to withstand more of the biotic stress as well as abiotic stresses. Like biotic stress can be in the form of pests or diseases. So local variety, which over the period of time they have sustained over in the nature, they have developed the genes which can withstand such kind of biotic stresses. Also, they have genes to withstand the abiotic stresses, like they can withstand the condition of drought, they can withstand the condition of high salinity, or they can withstand the condition of submergence also. Submergence means like if there is waterlogging. So it is very important that we need to conserve these traditional varieties. One of the example is that in tsunami, when the tsunami came in 2004, most of the coastal rice, they have withstand these conditions. Why? Because the local variety of rice, they already have a genes for salinity as well as submergence tolerance. That means they can withstand high salinity also, and they can tolerate waterlogging condition or submergence also. So the ultimate goal of our evergreen revolution requires conservation and enhancement of such traditional varieties. These varieties which can withstand biotic stress as well as abiotic stresses in the local climate. MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, they have also developed a community-centric gene, seed, grain, water banks with the view to link livelihood security of the farmer conservers with the ecological security. Basically, this is a same kind of a gene bank which we have in a agriculture, like we have in Delhi, we have in IRI, gene bank, seed bank. Similarly, kind of a community-centric gene, seed, grain, water banks are being developed at the level of community. So such kind of practices will promote the on-farm conservation by the rural and tribal communities. They don't get recognition for such kind of banks, but it can promote sustainable agriculture. Let us understand about it. They have developed, this is the figure for integrated gene management. You know about this in situ measures for conservation of biodiversity. These are national parks, protected area, biosphere reserve, world heritage site. Similarly, these in situ measures are being developed by the Forest, Environment and Wildlife Department of concerned state government or central government. Similarly, ex situ conservation management are done by government agencies and university in the form of botanical gardens, zoo, our zoological gardens, and gene banks. These are done by the government agencies like our agriculture universities or university which develop botanical garden or agriculture university which have gene banks, seed banks. Besides that, this MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, they have given the concept of a community conservation. This is being done by the tribal and the rural family at the level of community. So in the community, they do in situ, they again have a in situ on-farm techniques, and they also adopt ex situ on-farm techniques. In situ means again in the nature. So in the nature, they preserve the land races and folk varieties. This means they have certain area of land which they preserve for local local varieties. For local, and they also use for the various folk varieties. Similarly, they have ex situ on-farm techniques like sacred grove. Sacred groves is like we develop certain parts of these groves in which we develop, we conserve or we plant the trees or plants which we required for our rituals, our this religious purpose. Like we grow banana in that, hibiscus in that. Like in Hindu rituals, we use banana tree. Then we plant mango trees. So these are, we also have certain indigenous and species which we require only for ritual purpose. So we generally have these in a sacred groves. So this is the kind of ex situ community gene bank and in situ on-farm conservation technique. Such kind of ex situ community gene bank is unique in the sense that accessions are developed by the rulers and tribal community. It means they develop an inventory, they develop an accession of these. These all activities are done by the ruler and tribal farming families. And what this research foundation do, they have developed the technique for a storage facility, like they have done in the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in Chennai. They have developed a storage facility to store them within the temperature of 4 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius. And this is for conservation. So now we come towards the end. Just this is again the same thing. We are having a gene bank, seed bank, water bank, grain bank. This is a collective form of conservation, cultivation, and consumption in a mutual reinforcing method. So we have just learned about in situ on farm with the help of in-field gene banks. Seed bank can be in the form of seed bank. We are preserving the seeds of local variety so that we can use in the future, and also they will be more adapted to the local conditions. Then we also have water bank, various methods to conserve the rainwater, groundwater, and surface water resources. Then we have a grain banks to cater emergencies, like they store the grains so that whenever certain conditions come, like flood or any unprecedented conditions of drought, flood, or tsunami-like condition, then they can provide the grains to the needy people. So these are all references which I have used in the present presentation.